is also the director of National Heritage Language Research Center. She has numerous publications, and the last one is Heritage Language Education in New Field Emergency enrolled in 2008.
In 2006, Department of Education established or funded a new center that's called the National Heritage Language Research Center. Susan Slimowitz talked about the National Area Studies, whatever they're called, research centers, right? There are 127, 150, something like that. But the same Title VI out of the U.S. Department of Education also funds 15 National Language Research Center, whose mission is to try and make sure that American K through 12 and other maybe educational entities do a good job in teaching languages. So in 2006, we applied, UCLA, the Center for World Languages that I direct also, applied for this National Heritage Language Research Center, and we were funded. And then now we were just refunded in 2010. Of course, we were cut 50%, same way as all the other centers, but nevertheless, we exist, and there is a reason for our existence. This center is the only one that's dedicated just to heritage languages. I think at this point, most other language research centers also do some work in heritage languages because it became a new field about 10 years ago and everyone is interested in it, but we are the only one it's our mission. So the mission is research into heritage language acquisition. We probably do somewhat more research than some other centers because it's a new field. But we're not funded to do research. We're only funded to do research as a step for developing innovative teaching practices, doing professional development, design of instructional materials, assessment, and so on. And this is what we've been doing. The reason why people focus, and lots of people now in various fields focus on heritage languages, and there are dissertations at UCLA in anthropology, in applied linguistics, in language departments that actually deal with heritage languages. So there are all kinds of reasons. And the first one is a need for speakers of less commonly taught languages in this country. And so many, with the exception of Spanish, I think most of the other languages, heritage languages are less commonly taught. So there is some hope in the federal government, maybe in private industry, that if we know how to teach these students, we will get more advanced level proficient speakers or readers or writers and so on in these languages. Linguists are interested in research because that gives them an opportunity to study an interrupted language development, which is a rare thing in a way, but very frequent in these learners. And then there are the community leaders that work on that because sometimes if children don't speak the language, it creates problems with their families, with parents who may not speak English or may not speak English well enough and things like those. And there are other reasons. And the reason why I'm interested and my center is interested in this is the pedagogical necessity. Because in many less commonly taught languages, when you walk into a language classroom or you try to create a program for the next language as a foreign language, you come across this phenomenon that half of the students in your class may actually not be beginning students of a foreign language. So you walk into Persian 1, you walk into Armenian 1, maybe Russian 1, Hindi 1, etc., and you find out that lots of students look like they understand your jokes, or they kind of look at you differently, and when they speak, they sound differently, and their knowledge may be limited, but it certainly is different from foreign language learners' knowledge who come to us with zero, right, or with some exposure through a textbook, this kind of thing. So it does become a pedagogical necessity in many languages, starting with Spanish, of course, which has enormous numbers of heritage language learners, to understand what we can do to teach these learners better, but also to teach the beginning learners better, so that the two would not make it difficult for each other to gain proficiency. I'm sure you're familiar with these demographics, that at this point, about 20% of the US population speak a language other than English at home. And heritage language learners, heritage language speakers, come from those homes. So if parents immigrate and speak and are native speakers of a certain language, their children who grow up here, who go to an English-speaking English environment school, who are educated in English, are not native speakers of the home language. They are what we call now, that's a reasonably new term, heritage language speakers. There are other terms used in other parts of the world, community language speakers, home language speakers, immigrant languages used in Europe, but the idea is the same. You know, I don't know why it's heritage in this country. Someone came upon this name, some people object to it, saying that it means looking backward. But whatever it is, it's a term that's stayed, and once we have the term, so we got this whole science kind of around it. So about 20% is a pretty high number. If we look at the number, and I think you must be familiar with these numbers. This is the data by the US Census Bureau, the community survey. In LA County, where I would think a lot of students would come to this university, and to UCLA as well, of course, too, we have 43,000 speakers of Arabic. So it means these are the people who announced on some form somewhere for the census that they speak Arabic at home. I understand that when you say they speak Arabic at home, I'm not sure, we don't know what we're talking about, because there are all the dialects. You know, they don't speak modern standard, they speak something else. And that, of course, what everyone who teaches Arabic always points out. You bring all these students together, and it's still a problem because they all speak different languages. But of course, it's not only Arabic. In Chinese, in a Mandarin class, you get students who speak Cantonese, who come from Taiwan, who come from elsewhere. In a Hindi class, you get all kinds of students who know another Indian language. So this problem is not unique to Arabic, but it's a big problem. In Persian, there are higher numbers. We know that Persian is a very popular, so to say, language, big language in Los Angeles. And in Persian, the situation is somewhat different. I've been explained several times that Persian is a very simple language. It's always remained the same. And I'm just quoting one of the professors at UCLA who had this. But I understand this opinion too, because you can say the same about Russian. You know, Russian hasn't changed much. It's a standard enough variety of a language. So I added Russian because I was told before this conference that, well, Russian has some, and geopolitically, of course, Russian plays some role in Middle Eastern studies. And then I didn't include Armenian because I was told that Armenian is taught at CSUN already. However, of course, there is a big population of Armenians, and the situation would be very similar. So looking at these numbers, I think we can easily imagine that if you offer a class in Arabic or Persian, certain percentage of your students would be students coming from homes where that language is spoken, right? What percentage, I don't know. I know that at UCLA, in a Persian class, Iranian, I think it's Iranian 1, 2, 3, and so on. In Iranian classes, the percentage of students who speak Persian from home is extremely high, the same as in Armenian, okay? I know also that in Arabic, it's much lower. So, you know, I don't know the situation on this campus, but I would imagine that some students would come with some Arabic. I know also that in Arabic, some students would come with the written knowledge, which is unusual for other languages, because they know how to read the Quran, they may not know how to speak. So that's another interesting angle, interesting from a teaching point of view, I suppose, of how you deal with these students. Okay. Whenever I talk about heritage language learners and what they need in teaching and such, you do need to bring up a definition. And generally, if you talk about foreign language teaching, no one asks you who is a foreign language learner. We all know, right? With heritage, it actually is more difficult. So my center uses these two definitions as working definitions. The narrow definition, it's those students who are somewhat bilingual, and you need to understand bilingualism not as a balanced bilingualism, but one language is weaker, one language is stronger, but the person who can somewhat communicate in both languages and can comprehend both languages. Typically, not even typically, if we talk about the heritage languages, that's a weaker language of the two. If the home language is a stronger language than English, this person is not a heritage speaker. He or she is probably a native speaker of the language. So the narrow definition stresses some functional proficiency in the language. The broad definition stresses cultural affinity, meaning, I was born in a family where language X was spoken. I know about food, I know about traditions, I know about religion, whatever it is I know, but I cannot speak the language. Or I know 3 words that my grandfather told me 30 years ago. So and sometimes people confuse those and they think, these students come from homes, these students come from homes where the language was spoken or is spoken and they know the culture, which means they need a separate class. They don't need a separate class. They need to go into a beginning class. You need to understand that they would have some idea what culture is, and maybe limited, but the people of narrow definition, I believe, need their own curriculum, need their own class. If it's impossible and you have to have a mixed class, there needs to be some degree, and I think a high degree of differentiation for these students. The argument which is always made is that we have no resources. We cannot afford to open a separate class for heritage learners, separate class for, and so on. That we've tried that and we only had 5 heritage learners sign up. I hear that all the time, and you find these arguments in research. I also find that if you open the class and announce it and make sure students begin to know about it, by word of mouth, so they know there is a class for them. That's what Russian-speaking students at UCLA, I hear them say, we have a class for us. They have a class where they don't have to learn what they don't need to learn. They don't need to learn what they already know. We take them from where they are to where they hopefully will be. So that's the main structure of the curriculum. You can structure it many ways. It can be a reading curriculum. You can stress grammar. You can do whatever you want with it, but you need to understand that there is so much knowledge that's there already. If you try to place the students and you give them a placement exam, it may not work because they may not be literate. They may not be literate enough, Sometimes even if you test them orally, you just get a certain sample of what they can do. And you do need to place in some way, but there is also a psycholinguistic factor that as they're learning the language, they are remembering it, they're recovering it. So you need to give them, in my opinion, the benefit of a doubt. So you push them up. Try not, my opinion is not to push them down. Okay? All right, I will skip the other definitions. There are lots of them. I'll skip this. Just want to, maybe I'll finish with this. I want to give you an example of some work that I did interviewing and looking at tests and so on of Russian heritage language learners. The purpose here, because people often say, they're all so different. heritage language learners are also different. It does make sense to put them in one class because it's still a mishmash. And they are very different. They come from different backgrounds. They use language differently. You know, there are all kinds of things. But what it looks to me that you could look at your learners and do something similar to this by very simple means, by some questionnaires plus some testing, and understand how they break down. So then you can say, oh, all right, group 3 and 4 could probably be in one class. It's not a problem. Group 1 doesn't need a class of language at all because they went to high school in whatever country, but they could use some class where they learn academic language, you know, because they didn't get that. They didn't go to college. And then there could also be a group, which is here group 5, students from former Soviet republics, for example, who come with Russian as a second language. You know, it's hard to know. So I'm sure there would be a group like that in any language group. So, but a very rough study like that could be very helpful. And also polling the students and see what it is they want in their classes may also go a long way. Let me see. That's it? All right. Let me see if I have. I'll end with this. My center did a study where we surveyed 1,800 students in 22 languages to see what a typical profile of a heritage language learner is. And this is what we got. It's basically a second or 1.5 generation. It typically is a sequential bilingual, but still and is that clear, sequential bilingual? No. Okay, sequential bilingual means they first learn the home language, and then at age 5 or so, they start learning English. And simultaneous bilinguals would be learning both. You know, like maybe parents speaking to different languages, something like that. And 1.5 is clear? Okay. But still, even if they stop speaking home language all the time at age 5 or 6, they continue using it in some ways with parents and other ways. And they also have heritage language-specific motivations and identities. And I think if we take this as a core, we can build a curriculum around this. Because if you look at this, you know who they are. You know what they need. You know they're not your typical foreign language learners. Thank you.